you very much. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity, but above all, thanks for all of you being here and being passionate about solving this issue. I only have about 10 minutes, so I won't take too much of your time. If I take less, it's even better, because I'm sure there are other people that are ready to talk more important things. But I've been very fortunate, and I want to thank Gunhild for the initiative that she's taken now in her third year. And I know I've tried to be here previous years, but for some reasons outside of my control that never worked. But the first year when you did it, I actually saw Bill Clinton the next day in London, because we had another conference in London. And he came and he said, if there's one thing you need to participate in, it's in the EAT Forum. Because what we are missing actually is a global agenda on food and food security. You have all the people here, and many of you know each other, and I see some familiar faces in the audience. You're all very passionate about the topic and move some of the paths forward, but there's actually very few possibilities to move the total agenda forward. I was very fortunate to be asked by the Secretary General to be on the high-level panel for developing the Sustainable Development Goals, which follow on the Millennial Development Goals. And slightly a little bit more work than I thought when I volunteered, but it was worth it. It was absolutely worth it to me, because as you can now see happening in the world, in the absence of a global agenda, the absence of a governance system that helps us deal with very interdependent, complex issues, climate change or financial markets and all these things. The Sustainable Development Agenda was probably the only opportunity we had, I felt, and I still think that is the case, to get a moral agenda out there, a moral agenda for humanity that frankly is missing. Most of these, the lack of confidence that you now see in the world is not an issue of rules or regulations. It's above all an issue of morality. And here in 2015, tough as the world economy might be, cynical as people might be about politicians or business world or many others, in an environment where trust is relatively low, our governments of the world have risen to the challenge. We actually had a very good year, in my opinion, in 2015. We came up in September with the Sustainable Development Goals. It was a very audacious goal to irreversibly eradicate poverty in a more sustainable and equitable way. And then we came in December in Paris with the COP21 on the first proof of the pudding, because everybody knows it's easy to sign declarations, and everybody knows that reputations are not anymore made by what people say, but certainly only by what people do. And we had the first opportunity in December with the COP21 in Paris to go after goal number 13, which is obviously climate mitigation. And surprise, surprise, I think it exceeded everybody's expectations. The job far from done, but there was a clear signal again being given to all the actors in this world that we're going to decarbonize the global economy. And not surprisingly, when you give that clear signal and direction also to the business community starts to act. When there is no clear signal and confusion, the business community will not invest. And interestingly, since Paris, which is now only 6 months ago, we have seen divestiture movements go up from 900 billion to right now 2.6 trillion. When financial markets are getting involved, business listens. We see more countries having stepped up. We see bigger business announcements in terms of their move to a decarbonized business model, including my company being carbon positive by 2030, and momentum is starting to build. Now, the biggest challenge we have is, not surprisingly, is to how do we build that same momentum around the Sustainable Development Goals. There is one thing that is fairly easy, if you want to, how complex it may be. I don't want to belittle it, but the one thing is, hey, we're going to attack climate change, and everybody can see what his or her piece of the climate change agenda is. But if you talk the Sustainable Development Agenda, it's a little bit more difficult to get your hands around. Awareness is slightly lower out there than climate change. And yet, it's probably the most important agenda that we have. It is the agenda we have on people. It is the agenda we have on planet. It is the agenda we have on prosperity. It is the agenda we have on peace. And it is the agenda we have on partnership. Without implementation of the Sustainable Development Agenda, we simply will not get there. And the reason I'm so enthusiastic about what you are doing, and Gunhild's great foresight, in all honesty, is that the importance of the food agenda within that is grossly underestimated. And there isn't any forum where we talk this holistically. There are many forums where we talk it, but we're not talking this holistically. So if we can use her passion, enthusiasm, vision, championing this, convening power and everything we have to drive this to a higher agenda every year a little bit more, I think we are making a great contribution to humanity, where frankly too many people are depending on us to rise to this challenge. The way that these SDGs are designed is actually in a very integrated way. You can take, for example, goal number 5 of gender equality. Talks about women and girls actually, but it actually permeates all of the goals. Although there is a separate goal, it's also women most discriminated against in education, or for example in peace and justice, the absence of peace and justice affects them more. Or if you talk about health or sanitation, interestingly, it permeates all these goals. You can look at goal number 13, which is climate action obviously, and you can see the same thing again. Life on land, life on water, economic growth and other goals are related to climate change. In fact, 10 out of the 13 goals have climate change in there. You can look at goal number 17 on partnership. And again, all these other goals have partnership in there. In fact, interestingly, for the business community that might be here, if you look now at the 169 targets, which are now more or less there, you can see that about 80% of them involve the active involvement in business. Otherwise, we won't get there. Now, it's not surprising because in a global economy, business now is 60% of the GDP, 80% of the financial flow, 90% of the job creation. So if there are any skeptics out there, get over it, is my point, because we will not be able to implement this global agenda if we don't work together. Now, and business, by the way, is understanding this more than any, that as far as poverty is concerned, that there is no business case in enduring poverty. If we don't solve this and continue to operate in a world where too many people feel that they are not participating or excluded from the economic process, this world will increasingly rebel against itself. And that is exactly what we see happening right now in an increasing extent. So time for action was yesterday already, but let's put it forward. Now, food and nutrition also runs across all of these goals. But I would say it's at the heart of the development agenda. It is not surprising that goal number 1 is poverty alleviation and goal number 2 is food security. It should be all goals here as well. But I think even more important than what we have on the agenda, like climate action or women or other things, it's one of the biggest issues that we need to solve, but it's also one of the biggest issues that we fall short of. And actually, interestingly, it is, in my opinion still, and it will be as long as I'm on this wonderful planet Earth, one of the easiest issues to solve. And yet we refuse to do it. There is no need for more PhDs. Elon Musk doesn't need to send any other mission to Mars. This is a thing that we have literally all the answers in our hands, and we refuse to act. We refuse to get it on the global agenda. The G20 conveniently dropped it like the G7 did. For some reason, we think it is acceptable. For some reason, we think it is acceptable to have 800 million people go to bed hungry every night, not even knowing that they wake up the next day, and just waste 30 to 40% of the food as if it's nothing. For some reason, we think it's acceptable that on the other hand, we are creating one of the biggest epidemics that the world has ever seen with diabetes too. For some reason, we think it's acceptable to have a food system so out of balance that it is a quarter of the climate change that we're organizing. We think it's more convenient to just cut down the forests of this world as if it's nothing. It was Hubert Reeves who said that man is the most insane species. He worships, unfortunately he said he, I apologize for the women here. He worships an invisible God, but destroys a visible nature, not realizing that the visible nature he destroyed is the invisible God he worshipped in the first place. This is exactly what we're trying to do here. And we're good at it. We're good at it. For some reason, this opinion that we have of ourselves of being the most intelligent species should be questioned as far as I'm concerned. And the interpretation that we give ourselves of man's dominion over us should be double questions. When the book of Genesis or other things talks about man's domination about the earth, it talks about giving us the credit of being the most intelligent species to be the stewards of the earth. And in the battle that we have between man and nature, man is going to lose. Unfortunately, already half the vertebrate species are disappearing, if you listen to WWF in the last 30, 40 years alone. And we're well on our way to do that in many other things. So this is a moment for us, this is a moment for humanity. I think that we have to rise to that challenge. And if you're in our position, it's as simple as that for me, if you're in our positions of relatively comfort, of relative security, of having actually survived many of these sustainable development goals, then it is our duty, it is nothing else. It's our duty to help these other people get that same opportunity. What we're talking here about is not about equality, what we're talking here about is simply same opportunity. What is wrong with that? What is wrong with that? Why don't we have the minimum decency to get people to not go to bed hungry? So if you look at all the goals, I see actually 17 reasons. And I'll go very quickly for the interest of time. But I wrote down very quickly this morning, because I have to say I wasn't very happy with my original talk, and I thought you knew all these things. So I wrote down 17 reasons why you need to do what you're doing and go in overdrive and make this the biggest gathering on a yearly basis with key milestones for progress. Humanity depends on it. We will not be able to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals if we don't. It's as simple as that. Goal number one is the reason is simply poverty. It happens to be goal number one. 80% of the people who live in poverty in this world are smallholder farmers. They're often monocrop farmers, so they don't get enough nutrition either. Every 10% increase in yield, just 10% increase in yield, not that difficult to do, is a 7% reduction in poverty in places like Africa. The biggest opportunity for poverty reduction is what you're discussing here. Reason number two, no hunger. I talked about the 800 million people. More people in this world still have as cause of death hunger than anyone from HIV, AIDS, malaria, tuberculosis, and many other things added to this. It is absolutely a zero hunger goal. Reason number three is basically good health. This is still a world where 2 billion people lack nutrition and decent healthy food, whilst 1.9 billion people, or 1.9 billion more or less, are on the other side, are becoming overweight or obese. That's 3.9 billion people out of balance. More than half of the world's population. So for good health reasons, by the way, stunting in some of these emerging markets, 160 million kids a year, cost in sub-Saharan Africa, many of these economies, 10 to 13% of their GDP. You'd ought to think business is interested in that as well. Reason number four is education. The 500 million smallholder farmers that we talk about don't even have enough money for obviously the nutrition, but also to send their children to school. In fact, $1 invested in that nutrition has a $17 return for the economy. I challenge any business to come up with a better rate of return. And reason number five is gender equality. And this is to get disappointed about, but a tremendous opportunity. 66% of the world's work is done by women. Only 10% of the income goes to women. 70% of these people live in poverty, and again, mainly women. So just investing in women farmers, giving them the same access to financing, education, or training, would actually increase the yield by about 20% and have 200 million people go less hungry to bed. That alone should be an easy solution. Reason number six is obviously water and sanitation. 70% of the water use is in agriculture. We need to feed immense amounts of people more, changing dietary habits. Some people say that in the next 30, 40 years, we need to produce as much food as we've done in the last 10,000 years. I don't know if that is totally right, but that is more or less what we have. So from a water and sanitation point of view, a tremendous opportunity. And this is still a world where 750 million people, and the numbers are going up again, lack access to clean drinking water. If they lack the access to clean drinking water, let's be sure in agriculture, we're not going to waste it. Reason number seven is renewable energy. We are actively pushing biofuel. I was just in Brussels. A great law passed, 10% biofuel. It's biofuel number one. actually more damage to people that can't eat, more damage to climate change. So if we go that direction on energy, sure, the agricultural part of our economy has to play a great role, but we have to be smart in doing that. And generation 2 or 3 is obviously coming around the corner, and we need to be sure that we have the policies in place to obviously stimulate that. And reason number 8 is a reason of good jobs and economic growth. Actually, again, in line with the Sustainable Development Goals. The 500 million smallholder farmers, the 1.3 billion jobs that depend already today directly on agriculture. Now here comes the crunch. We're sitting on top of a technology wave which some people call the fourth industrial revolution. That is marvelous. We can give the farmers now access on their mobile phones. We can get financial inclusion for women, and all the things you talk about is marvelous. I really am pleased about that. But it's also going to be the biggest job destruction that the world has ever seen. In fact, some people think that the combination of artificial intelligence and Internet of Things and robotics and all the things you know is going to destroy up to 1.8 billion jobs. Think about the world of driverless cars, of peopleless checkout counters, of robots in all the manufacturing facilities. How are we going to supply jobs to people? One of the commitments we have made in our company, in our value chain, is to create 5 million jobs for smallholder farmers. If we don't think about things differently, also in farming, and make it an inclusive job creation strategy, the numbers simply don't add up. Innovation and infrastructure is reason number 9. 40% of the calories today are wasted, and one of the main reasons why these calories are wasted with all the effects of climate change and all the other things is, in many of these countries, especially the poor countries, we don't have the infrastructure in place. The world is going to invest $90 trillion in the next 15 years to accommodate infrastructure. Part of that is urbanization. We also need to feed these cities. The world population in cities, by the way, is going to double. Now there are 50% of people living in cities. 7 billion population, 3.5 billion people in cities. The world is going to 9-10 billion people. 70% are going to live in cities. The city population is going to move from 3.5 billion to 7 billion people. That's why the initiative that you've done together, that Gunhild was just talking to me about, with the C40 is so important. We are going to build in the next 30 to 40 years as many cities in the world as we currently have in the world. What does that mean? That means every 8 to 10 weeks we are building a new Manhattan to just accommodate that. So how we build this infrastructure and how we supply the food, etc., absolutely going to be important. And reason number 10, is the one of reduced inequality. The 60% of the smallholder farmers are not actually that equally treated. In fact, they use 1% of the world's resources. By the way, the top 1.2 billion people in this world use 75% of the world's resources. Which brings me to reason number 11, which is sustainable cities and communities. 70% of the world population lives in these cities, and as I mentioned at that time, we need to be sure that we make them sustainable, also from an agricultural point of view. Responsible consumption. You wouldn't say wasting 600 to 800 billion in food by wasting 30 to 40% of the food is responsible consumption. So what does a circular economy look like in our food value chain? And reason number 13 is climate action. I don't want to spend more time on that, but it was Gandhi who said what we do to the forests of this world is a mere reflection to what we do to ourselves and one another. He already saw this coming. We're cutting down the forests as if we don't care. Half of Belgium disappearing every year, 12 million acres. And we're going at it as if we continue to do. 60% of that deforestation is obviously driven by the demand for food. Meanwhile, we're getting a lot of land that we should be using that is increasingly degraded. Tremendous opportunities to think about that differently, and that's why we got all the Consumer Goods Forum companies together to make this moratorium to not sell anything, beef, pulp, palm oil, soy, by 2020 that comes from what I continue to call illegal deforestation. Life below the water. Interestingly, all the food we produce needs packaging to transport. That's a good thing. Probably makes the food last a little bit longer. But did you know that only 10% of that packaging gets reused and 90% of that packaging gets wasted? And did you know that 90% of that packaging that gets wasted, the bulk is ending up in the oceans? In 2030, we will have more weight of plastic in the oceans than the combined weight of fish swimming in the oceans. And if you know that 1 billion people already make their livelihoods, that we need these nutrients in our value chain, then it does affect the food supply. And reason number 15 is life on land. And this is what I talked about with the forests. I don't want to repeat that. Then reason number 16 is peace and justice. Most of the issues we have in agriculture is simply because in many of the rural parts there are no land rights. In Africa there are very few land rights for women. In Indonesia the issues of palm oil are concessions and land rights, very difficult to untangle. Many of the indigenous people that you're trying to protect don't have access to the legal system. So still a world where 4 billion people are excluded from access to that, and most of them, as you can understand, are in agriculture. And then finally, reason number 17, as you already have guessed, reason is partnership. Tremendous partnerships are starting to emerge, like the Grow Africa partnership or the Grow Asia. Hopefully the partnership that the World Business Council is talking with the EAT Forum, and other transformative partnerships like the C40s. Einstein saying doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results is the definition of insanity. We really have to move out of that and start working at different levels of that partnership. And that partnership obviously requires us to work in a different way. We need to get food security, as I said, much higher on the global agenda. It's a tragedy that we cannot get the world's political leaders that we elect to look beyond a 3-month horizon these days. It's a tragedy that we cannot keep this on the G20 agenda. I used to be the chairman of the Food Security Task Force for the B20, but it's very hard to now even get a mentioning in any of these reports. We need to show the potential of developing the food agenda when we advocate for the SDGs. We have the SDG advocates, some of them are here. Your wonderful His Royal Highness is here. She is one of the advocates in Sweden. We have advocates in many other countries, and we need to get that much higher on the agenda. Then finally, in the UN, we need to start thinking differently. I personally believe that having the different agencies, and I think they are wonderful agencies that we have, like FIAT or the World Food Programme or the FAO and many others, we are too fragmented to handle this agenda holistically, and we put some energy behind that would be good. And then we need to think about financing. The financing is always an issue that is challenging, but we have found mechanisms to finance the climate change agenda. We should find mechanisms that are much lower cost to finance the Food Security Act. To not have these people go to bed costs you 80 billion a year. We waste 600 to 800 billion, 10 times more. The countries that we have in the world, like Kenya or Zambia or Mali or Tanzania, that actually have invested in agriculture, have seen their yields triple, and they don't have the same issues anymore as some of the other countries. Yet in most countries, the investments in agriculture have come down. And then we need the political will to galvanize. At the end of the day, it's the political will. And how can we get this political will galvanized? It's where you all come in. It's true leadership from each and all of you. At the end of the day, the things in the world only move because people rise to the action, like Gunhild has done with the EAT Forum. It's individual people that make the difference. People that put the interest of others ahead of themselves. People with a high level of awareness and engagement of what is going on in the world, but then act like she does with a high level of humanity and humility. People that understand that to build trust, you need to work in partnership. People that know that things doing together, you can go faster, as the African proverb says, than if you go alone. If you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. People that like to work under openness. People that think long term. But above all, people that have a sense of purpose. That understand that they are the lucky few, and that the people that they represent, the people that didn't make it past the age of 5 for reasons of sanitation or health, the people that didn't have a chance to go to education and couldn't stand here and deliver a talk in English, or the people that simply are too hungry to go to bed, not even knowing if they wake up the next day. These people, these leaders understand that they can put their energy to their common good. That by investing in others, taking the higher moral agenda, they're actually longer term investing in themselves as well. These are the type of people that we need. These are the type of leaders that we need. I believe these are the type of leaders that you are. That's why you are here. I certainly agree that this is the best agenda to get your zero hunger, zero emissions, zero resource waste, zero poverty. And that is an enormous, audacious agenda. But as John F. Kennedy said very simply, if it's not now, when? And if it's not us, who? My final point, as I've mentioned many times again, the scarcity that we have here is two things in this world. we're short of leaders and trees. So let us not disappoint our future generations. Let's make them proud and say we were the last ones that had to deal with poverty. The ones before us clearly didn't solve it. The ones after us don't have to solve it anymore. And we are the first generation that took the decisive actions to get out of climate change, which obviously is the very closely related agenda. Nothing more noble than what you're doing in food security. I thank you for the opportunity, but above all, I thank you for what you're doing. Thank you very much.